Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Here in the mountains, we got a few snowflakes today, harbinger of things to come. And I've also learned, when you're recording, it's best not to touch the mic, even if it's in your ear.
Yes, we are going with a slightly different audio setup than usual. So yeah, make sure not to brush your hair behind your ears too many times or you will be hitting the mic. But we are here today to talk about the Packers schedule, as well as to continue our deep dive series into Packers draft picks. We're going today with Dani Dennis-Sutton. If you want to check out our McClellan deep dive or Cisse deep dive, go check those out in your feed. But I was going to say, since we're going to be talking a little bit about the schedule and maybe some December games, maybe some snow on the ground up there is maybe a good omen for the frozen tundra going forward, because we do have quite a few games in Lambeau in December. Hopefully, maybe those will be snow games. Maybe this is a good sign of things to come.
Maybe this will be the year where we regain control of the home field advantage in Green Bay.
That we have
four
lost.
Of our last five games in
four of the last
Lambeau.
five in Lambeau, and one of the five being just down the street in Chicago.
Yeah, and speaking of good luck charms, the snow, and Mom is wearing a Green Bay sweatshirt, ready for the podcast.
It's all a good sign as we talk about the schedule. But yeah, like we said, got a bit of news to touch on the schedule and then that deep dive. Before we get into any of that, though, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear, subscribe, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the usual. Follow us again on Blue Sky at Father Son Packer. Leave a comment, leave a review, tell us what you think. Interact, at Father Son Packer again on Blue Sky. I just had to do the quick spiel because we do have a lot to talk about, because I do want to touch on the schedule. I do want to touch on the other news. And then, of course, we have a lot to talk about with Dani Dennis-Sutton, a player I think both you and I are really excited about, and a player I think a lot of Packers Nation is really excited about. But what is the upside? Why did he fall to the fourth round? We'll talk all about that. Before we get to that, though, a bit of other news. Brandon Cisse has officially signed his $9.3 million contract with $8 million guaranteed, and that makes all the draft picks now signed for the Packers. It's always a little bit, up in the air with those second rounders because the amount that it is guaranteed is not very standard. And so as we go over time, more and more agents are pushing for more of that to be guaranteed, obviously, which makes sense. That's what they should be doing for their clients. But usually it leads to
just a matter of time until
it's all guaranteed in the second round.
Yep. And then they'll start pushing to the third round.
Yep, and then good, as it should be. But yeah, so usually that can take a while for those second rounders, but it's good for the Packers to have that done. So now all of the draft picks are signed, and then a few other roster moves were made. The Packers claimed Brendan Rice, a wide receiver from the Raiders, son of Jerry Rice. So maybe Jerry Rice will make an appearance at Packers camp. You never know. He was a 2024 seventh round pick by the Chargers. Has kind of bounced around the league a little bit. Also picked up cornerback MJ Devonshire Jr. From the Bills. He was also a seventh-round pick of the Raiders in 2024. So also a seventh-rounder from a couple of years ago, was a draft pick. Guy that, having been with the Bills, say that 3 times fast, maybe a little bit of familiar there with Babbage, who is now with us and had been the DC with the Bills previously. So maybe he put in a good word for him. And then the other one was we claimed tight end Luke Lakey, but he failed his physical, which is the second bigger type tight end to fail their physical after Falai, who was going to be an UDFA for us, failed his physical. And so it seems like we are looking for more tight ends, but we are having trouble finding them.
If you're blocking tight end right now, is this really where you want to try? I mean, because the other guy they lost Fitzpatrick from last year late with the Achilles tear, right? That was maybe they're one of the best blockers.
Our third tight end spot is a little bit cursed right now. Yeah, so just stay safe out there. It does seem like we are going to, I would imagine at some point, sign another tight end. We've tried several times. But that's the main thing news-wise. In terms of that, anything you want to touch on there, it felt all pretty boilerplate. I do want to talk about the schedule a little bit, though, because, it is content. It's May. We are waiting for more football stuff, and at least this is something to talk about.
Oh, and they made a big deal about releasing it. So, the NFL basically tried to dominate a week of news just with the announcing the schedule in drips and drabs. But one thing I want to mention is Packers PR department.
Yeah, it was really good.
Is this their best schedule release video ever?
It's got to be up there. So if you didn't see it, it's all stop motion, all handmade by the studio that does Robot Chicken or did Robot Chicken. So they brought them in. It was all like claymation. Tom Grassi made an appearance. I thought it was really awesome. I was a big fan. It was definitely, I think, up there for my favorites. Did you see any of the other ones? Like, did you see the Colt Simpsons one? Because I like the Simpsons one, obviously, because it's the Simpsons. Chargers did the Halo one, which was really good. I'll send you the Colts.
And I figured
I
had to watch the Chargers because the Chargers have done such a good job in the past.
I mean, you could argue they really set this whole thing in motion, because like now every team is doing schedule release videos. And they really started the whole thing. But they did the Halo one, which was good. There were a number of other ones that I thought were pretty good. But yeah, I'll send you the Colts one because the Simpsons one was pretty good. In terms of looking at the Packers schedule, though, I think the main takeaways are always because the players the teams you're going to play against and where you're going to play against them before the schedule is even out. But the main thing is always the bye week, the rest, the travel, the primetime games, and like when you have home games and when you have away games. But so looking at that, bye week, week 11. And interesting thing about that is it's going to be right before we play LA on Thanksgiving Eve for the inaugural Thanksgiving Eve game. And so it's going to be a little bit like having two mini buys. So because it's going to be week 10, you play Sunday, November 15th. And then you have a bye week, week 11, but then you play November 25th. So that's a 10-day kind of off between week 10 and your next game, week 12. And then you don't play again until the following Sunday, December 6th, which is also like about another 10 days off. So you get kind of two mini buys instead of a standard 2-week off buy. What are your thoughts on having that instead of the usual time off? I like the time of year. I am actually kind of a fan of this two mini thing, but what do you think?
I actually think the two mini thing might be useful. One thing we are losing because of this stupid Wednesday game is we get no rest advantage after our bye.
Off our bye. Yeah, because the Rams will be coming off their bye too.
Have the bye because you have to have a bye before Wednesday game.
Yeah, exactly. Or they could have played Thursday before, I suppose, is like the only other way that could have worked.
Yeah, that was the other way to do it. That's still that wouldn't be great because then you're having two short rests in a row. If you did that.
Well, if they had Thursday, then they'd have a full week
back up
off.
the bye.
Yeah, but
almost
either. But that's not how it's going to go down. We are going to essentially not have that extra rest advantage that we would have in terms of a bye. Overall, though, if you look at the rest, we're at minus 2 days of rest, which is like 20th in the league. So it's not great, but it's around the average. Like it's not as bad as like some of the Chargers rest advantage is crazy. They're like negative 30 something. And then also the travel, we have the 5th least travel. So I think overall, yeah, you do lose some rest there by not having that full week off advantage against the team you're playing off your bye.
So who set up the Charger? Who set up the Charger schedule? The Chiefs
think they
or the
forgot
Raiders?
to give them a bye. Yeah, I think they forgot to give them a bye. They just didn't get one. It is kind of wild because they don't. They essentially have a full week's less rest than the next least rested team. Goodness, I am struggling today. But yeah, so that's the main thing there. I think I like the late week bye, like the 2 mini buys. I think it'll hopefully help us kind of heal up because I guess if you were to take that week 12 off, you'd have a long time off if you had a player who was dealing with an injury. And then in terms of when the team is playing, 6 primetime games, only trailing the Rams with 7. There are a handful of teams with 6, but the Packers are one of them. And then the other thing is, let's first talk about the start of the year really quickly. So the first 4 weeks are going to be really important for Green Bay. Number one, because some players are going to be coming off of injury, including Micah, Tucker, Zach Tom, Wyatt we're not as sure about. We think he'll be ready, but we're still not sure. And looking at the first 4 weeks, it is 3 road games, but it is probably some of your easier teams. So we're going to open at Minnesota, an afternoon game on Sunday, September 13th. And then it is at Jets versus Atlanta at Tampa. And so having the Jets and Atlanta in there in terms of 2 of your probably easier matchups is not the worst thing. And so of those first 4 weeks opening at Minnesota, what were your thoughts, Dad, on that start of the schedule there, being a little road heavy, but maybe being some of the weaker teams you're playing against?
I was pretty happy with what we were able to get, considering if we have to play 4 games without Micah or anybody else, that it's a relatively easy schedule. One thing I don't think is getting enough play is how well Gannon is going to know Kyler.
That's true. That's true. Having experience there in that matchup, it's definitely going to be interesting. with, you could make the counter argument. No, Kyler knows how to play against his defense, but I think probably goes a little bit of
Does
both
he?
ways. I guess, I mean, he got benched, so I guess we don't know. But it is a bit of a Kyler revenge game is probably going to be the narrative there, right? Where it's like, oh, you benched me, like
I suppose.
and now I'm on this new team. I feel like that might be the narrative there. But yeah, so
Is
at
he want
Minnesota
revenge
opening
against
week,
both the Packers and the Cardinals if he gets the chance?
I think that's a tough opening matchup against Minnesota. I think that's going to be a really good game. I think that's going to be a good test, for a Packers team that's coming off of losing 5 games in a row. You'd hate to make it 6, especially against a division opponent, especially week 1. So that feels like kind of almost a must win right off the bat. But then you got at New York versus Atlanta on a Thursday night, and then at Tampa in like a Sunday morning game. So I think ideally you come out of that stretch 3-1. But what that opening stretch with all those away games does open you up for is the last 5 weeks of the season is home game, at Chicago, home game. And so it is a bit of a tough stretch because you are playing Buffalo, Houston, and Detroit at home, with Miami thrown in there as well. Also, not having to play Miami in the heat is also a plus. But so 4 games in winter in Lambeau, we should have a decent advantage there, right?
Yeah, I think we'll have a huge advantage on Miami and Houston. Last time CJ Stroud was playing in bad weather, it did not go well for him.
I mean, you could argue Detroit too, with Goff, not being
Detroit,
much of an outdoor guy.
Right, being a dome team, they're just as good as a warm weather team in terms of what they're used to.
Probably not much advantage over Buffalo outdoors. Probably about they're probably like, yeah, we're ready for this. Don't worry about that.
There.
That's a game I'm looking forward to, though. That'll be a Sunday night
table
game.
Party in the snow.
That'll be a fun Sunday night Lambeau game. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, hoping there's a snow globe.
Yeah, exactly. I'm hoping for a snow globe for all of these, and hoping for some nice snowy weather. I love a snow game. I know it's in vogue these days to say, oh, everyone should have a dome, but I think not. Football should be played outdoors. Any other thoughts on the schedule?
Well, I was going to say we kind of know what happens. You kind of know what happens to NFC North teams after they get a dome. They never win again.
Hasn't gone well for them. Has not gone well for them. That's a fact. Any other things that stood out from the schedule? I mean, opening at Minnesota, and then you have Chicago week 5 in terms of division games, then Detroit week 7. The division games are pretty spread out this year as opposed to last year when like 5 of the 6 of them were in the last or 4 of the 6 of them were in the last 8 weeks, which was really weird. Pretty spread out this year, which is probably I think preferable, so they're not all in one stretch. I think the highlights of the season are definitely going to be those division games, those games against Chicago, those games against Detroit, those games against Minnesota. Playing at New England is going to be a good game. Playing at LA, playing Buffalo. I think it's a tough schedule, but it should be a good test as well, because you do get a couple of games where it's like New Orleans, Miami, Jets, Atlanta. You should win those games. You should be able to hopefully get some revenge on Carolina on a Thursday night, but Thursday nights are always weird. But anything else that stood out to you from the schedule?
Yeah, so it is overall a hard schedule. I think we're in the top 5 for hardest schedules. But
yeah, which I think
the Bears are second hardest.
I think that's also usually just a product of your division being hard. Usually because those are 6-year games. So
right, and the NFC North is really tough, and we're playing on the road against the Rams. So and New England. So we've added a couple hard games on top of that. Yeah,
I mean the non division games we're playing are because we're playing the NFC South this year, and then we're playing the AFC East. And then we're also got Dallas thrown in, which should be, reasonably tough game. Los Angeles thrown in, which should be a reasonably tough game. Houston thrown in, and Buffalo thrown in. So some tough extra games added to the schedule. But I mean, to be the best, you got to beat the best. So bring it on. I
think that week 5 game is going to be fire.
Raucous. Unfortunately, it sounds like that's a gold package game. So just don't.
Yes.
Don't sell those tickets, Milwaukee fans, please. Please don't sell those tickets. But no, that should be a good game. That's going to be the Fox primetime afternoon game too. So that's going to be the game of the week. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the rematch. I want all the smoke. Let's move on though, talking about some deep dive stuff, because I feel like we've spent a good chunk of time on the schedule already, and we have a lot to talk about with Dani Dennis-Sutton, because he's a player that a lot of people have been really excited about, and I'm really excited about, and I'm really excited to talk about. In terms of looking at this pick, so 4th round, pick 120, edge from Penn State. He's going to turn 23 in December, so still a younger-ish prospect. 4 years at Penn State, 2 years starting. He grew up in Millsboro, Delaware, and he was 73rd on the consensus board. So picked at 120, 73rd on the consensus board. I know was a player that a lot of Packers Nation was really, really high on. But Dad, what was your initial reaction when this draft pick was made?
I was really excited. I mean, by this point in the draft, he was my favorite player by a country mile. And I did not expect him to last that long. So I was really, and the fact that we, could have taken him earlier, and actually the consensus board, he was ahead of Chris McClellan on the consensus board.
Yeah,
so
which it was interesting because I guess it was just a run on position thing, where like we felt like we needed to get a D tackle there in that third round. But I think Gutekunst did mention that they were trying to trade back up for Dennis-Sutton, at the right after it's funny because you never know how much to believe this stuff because they're like, oh, we were trying to trade up for McClellan as soon as we drafted Cisse, and then it was like, oh, we were trying to trade up for Dennis-Sutton as soon as we drafted McClellan. I'm like, okay, so they always worked out for you.
Everybody we got was our favorite. Everybody we got was a favorite player in the entire draft.
Every player we got, we would have drafted 30 picks earlier. That's what we're saying, but we got him even later. But no, like you said, I was pumped for this pick. I honestly, like you said, I wouldn't have minded him with the first two picks. Second round probably would have been a little high, but I wouldn't have minded. You could have talked me into the upside and been like, oh, they just don't make many players at edge with this athleticism and this production from a big school. And we'll talk all about that in a second. But if you were just like, hey, this is the type of player, the profile makes sense. You could take him in the second and talk me into it. The fact that you got him outside the top 100 is that feels like a coup almost.
Yeah, I felt like it was a steal because he was, I don't know what the downside is here for him to have been picked earlier.
I mean, the downside is he's I feel like the floor is a decent rotational third or fourth edge who can come in and give you some pass rush and is not a total liability against the run. And he's a freak athlete at a major premium position. I don't understand how this player falls outside the top 100. Has played at a big program, played in a big conference. So, I mean, I'm pretty stunned to be able to have him, because I think immediately day one, he's and I'm saying this as someone who's high on Sorrell this year. I think Sorrell's going to have a good year, but I think he's immediately battling it out for that edge 3 spot.
I think so too. And you have usually if somebody edge rusher goes in the 4th, it's okay, he's either not very productive or not very athletic. But to
be both and to be at a big time school as well is another
school.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about, I guess we'll start with athleticism and then we'll transition to talking about production, because Dennis-Sutton for a 4th rounder is one of those rare players that combines both athleticism and production in a way that you usually don't see from players picked this late, which is why I think everyone was very excited about him falling this far. Because, and I do think it's fair to say, he tested as a super duper 99.9th percentile athlete. I don't know if he necessarily always plays that way, but he did test that way. So let's talk a little bit about that physical profile, because in terms of size, speed, fluidity, length at the position, he is in the upper echelon, is he not?
Right. So his RAS is 9.96, which means he's a 99.6 percentile athlete. And he did all the testing except for the short shuttle, 6'5" and 5/8 at 256 pounds. So of all the things he did, only his weight was below average for the position, the 45th percentile. Though at the Senior Bowl, he weighed 268 pounds. So he was significantly heavier there. 95th percentile height, 52nd percentile arm length at 33 and 3/8, 72nd percentile hand size at 10 and 1/8, 80th percentile wingspan at 80 and 82 and a quarter. Elite explosion, over 98th percentile in both jumps, the vert and the broad. Elite speed, over 94th percentile in the 40 and the 20-yard split, 84th percentile in the 10-yard split. Good strength. He did the bench. Not everybody does it. He was 85th percentile with 26 reps. Elite
and the fact that he did those 26 reps with long arms is also I think notable, because usually you got longer arms. I know he's not the craziest long arm athlete, but he's still 58th, whatever. He's a slightly longer than average arm length, but to be able to still be like super high level bench press, I think is like pretty impressive there. And I do think like when you watch him, the arm length shows and the wingspan shows because he looks. I remember the first time I watched him, I was like, oh yeah, like I know who I know who the NFL guy is there because that guy looks twice the size of everyone next to him because his arms are so long in terms of his wingspan because he's got a pretty broad chest too. But yeah, I think you can tell the strength, the wingspan, and the explosion. Now his agility is really good testing. I do feel like that was the part that I think translated the least when you watched him, though, because like you had you mentioned his three cone yet? Because his three cone is elite.
No, well, no, 97th percentile on the three cone, and he didn't do the short shuttle, but elite for the three cone.
Yeah, which I feel like is like he didn't always play like he had a 97th percentile three cone. Not that he's like totally stiff, but like that was the number where I was like, oh wow, like that's a like really impressive number for him, and that's where I wonder about him maybe coming into the like these athletic testing things a little bit lighter. Like if he starts playing at that lighter weight, would he have better bend? Would he? And like I guess I just also wonder about what weight he ends up playing at in the NFL.
Right, we don't know what he would have tested if he had kept at his 268 for the Senior Bowl, and apparently he was also heavier playing in the season. So he dropped 12 pounds for the combine, and so we don't know what his testing would have been like. But he took a a ding for being a little bit underweight.
True.
In the RAS score as well. So I don't know how these things would have balanced out, depending on how we would have tested. We'll never know. So I like to look at not just the draftees under Gutekunst, but also all the players in position that have also been signed as free agents or UNFAs who've played at least 100 snaps while Gutekunst has been the GM. And so there have been 19 of those players, and their average RAS that's actually not, it's 9.22, but that's the RAS of the average player. So if I figure out the average of every stat and then figure out the RAS for that theoretical player, not the average of all the RASs. But out of all of these, Dennis-Sutton is the tallest. He's basically right on the average weight, actually, at 256. Has the third widest wingspan behind only Enagbare and Preston Smith. Is tied for the best three cone with Clay Matthews.
Which is the Enagbare and Preston Smith thing is so funny. Because if you listed those three players, I would think Preston Smith, super long arms. Dennis-Sutton, super long arms. Enagbare, I never, watching him, felt like he had, a crazy wingspan. But, I mean, testing-wise, he does. I guess it's just,
his arm length is good.
Yeah.
He would use it. I remember in college seeing him using the long arm effectively for when we were looking at him as a prospect.
Something about his frame, he just didn't look as wide. But, I mean, when you're comparing him to these other guys, he is at the top of most of these other Packers edges, right?
Right. Yeah. He's tied for the best in three cone. So better than Micah by 0.06 or something like that. It's 6.9, 6.9, and then Micah was 6.96. But under 7 for a three cone for edge rusher is kind of crazy. He has the best broad jump and the best vertical jump of any of the Packers edges under Gutekunst. And he is slightly better than average in the 40-yard dash and the 20 and 10-yard splits. So all that testing is, comparing very well to other Packers edges and not just to everybody who tested.
Yeah, I mean, there are just not very many players in general that end up going under a 7-second three cone, especially at his size. He is a super freak athlete and was still a pretty good. That's the thing. His testing numbers are insane. I think on the field is maybe a little bit less so. You have the Senior Bowl numbers, right?
Yeah, so that's the thing where he did not show up quite as well for his testing. He was 12 pounds heavier. But at the Senior Bowl, out of 150 edge rushers, so this actually includes measurements of players at the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, where they use the Zebra Tech tracking system. He was only 33rd percentile on field, maximum speed, and weight adjusted 49th percentile. So I feel like for a lot of positions, the highest speed attained is maybe a little variable, depending on do you ever get yourself in a position to go out for a full sprint? So I feel like if you finish lower on that, I'm not as worried. I don't think it means as much as if you do really well.
Yeah, I think max
Max,
acceleration and max deceleration are like much more telling numbers from that like tracking stuff.
right. I think they're less susceptible to these kind of variations in how the plays play out. Because only 26th percentile in on-field max acceleration, 41st percentile when weight adjusted. Now his max deceleration was quite good, 76th percentile, and 84th percentile when weight adjusted.
Yeah,
So,
and so it's like
that looks a little better.
Which I think kind of, when you look at the GPS numbers compared to his like testing numbers, I think kind of lends some credence to the idea that like, hey, like he's a good athlete, but we did like a lot of the like scouts and the people who watch tape are like, he's like, you did not see this level of athleticism when he played at Penn State. And so the question is like, is he not tapping into that athleticism when he's playing because he's like busy thinking? Or is it a weight thing where it's like, hey, he was like 12 to 15 pounds heavier at Penn State. He's not going to be as explosive. And then the question then is, what weight does he play at in the NFL? And if he were to drop weight, can he still be as effective as he was at Penn State? Because that's the thing, is his numbers were like, despite him, like a lot of people saying he didn't play to the athleticism he tested at, I mean, he played plenty well enough. So maybe that doesn't even matter, right?
Yeah. So it's a good thing to think about, though. It's like, what should the Packers have him do? Should they have him play at the weight he did last year, or should they have him play at the weight he tested?
Yeah, because
which we don't know how that translates on field.
Exactly, because when you look at, like, I guess as we transition over to like how he played at Penn State, when you look at his production, like, and that's something that's like I think really tantalizing about him is not only is he an elite athlete, he was really good at one of the best conferences in the entire nation when he was playing in the Big Ten at Penn State. And so in terms of like how he was used, he was pretty much just a traditional outside edge rusher. He lined up over the tackle like 5% of the time, but pretty much true just outside edge rusher. He was an every down player for them, though. He was, in terms of looking at this past season, he was 94th percentile in run snaps faced and 90th percentile in total pass rush snaps. So he was playing a lot against the run. He was playing a lot against pass sets. They were having him on the field all the time. Super high usage and really heavily relied upon by Penn State. Last season, looking at 517 edge rushers that had at least 200 snaps. In terms of pass rush, he was 91st percentile in pressure rate and 84th percentile in sack rate. When you look the season before, he was 85th percentile in pressure rate and 87th percentile in sack rate. So he was well over 80th percentile in both of those numbers, both in 2024 and 2025. So you have a couple of years of pass rush production to kind of rely on there. And then in terms of run defense, I think this is like where he's a bit of a splash player. So he was 69th percentile in stop rate in 2025 and 80th percentile in stop rate in 2024. He was also a really high number of total stops, over 90th percentile both in 2024 and 2025 in total stops. So the stop rate is like stops divided by run snaps. So he was playing a lot against the run, so he was going to rack up more stops. But he was still making impact plays, and a stop is, considered a tackle against a run play where the offense did not have success. Now, with that, though, came quite a few missed tackles. So he was 18th percentile in missed tackle rate. That's like the bad side in 2025, and 23rd percentile in missed tackle rate in 2024. And the missed tackle rate was pretty consistently high during his time at Penn State. It was greater than 20% 3 out of his 4 years. And so I think that's something where, Paul Noonan wrote about this a little bit, talking about like, hey, at times it's a bit of a, he's a victim of his longer wingspan. He's able to get his hand on guys a little bit easier than some other shorter wingspan players might be able to. And so those are counting as missed tackles. But I do think that is something where when you
like the classic shortstop argument,
that was exactly actually
what at all or not.
That was exactly the analogy, the allegory that Noonan was using was like, hey, if you're like a really good shortstop, you're going to make more errors because you're getting to more difficult plays. And then the hit rate on those difficult plays is just inherently lower. And so that was the kind of like comparison he was making is like, Dani Dennis-Sutton gets to a lot more plays because of his longer wingspan, but he's getting like a hand on the guy. And so that counts as a missed tackle, but like a shorter arm guy also would not get there, but it wouldn't count as a missed tackle. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind there is it's a bit of like, selection bias there in some ways, survivorship bias, I guess. The other interesting note in terms of his production, also pretty good on special teams. He had 3 block punts last season, which is probably something he's going to have to do as like a 4th round guy. But looking at this production profile, Dad, I mean, there's really not a whole lot to like hate on there. I mean, he made splash plays against the run, although he did give up some plays as well. And he was a really productive pass rusher, which is honestly the most important thing, for 2 straight years against, some of the top competition in all of college football.
Yeah, I'm very excited. The only real downside to see is the missed tackle rate.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
the missed tackle rate's the question.
Making plays all over the place that you want. And he's, got the athleticism and the competition to make you think it's translatable.
And the missed tackle thing, I mean, the counter argument to that, because the question there is like, oh, is he not able to finish plays? He was able to finish plays as a pass rusher, and so that's something where it's like, okay, maybe that's something that like you can see it translating in the passing game. It just needs to come along a little bit more in the run game. But I mean, he plays strong against the run. Like, he can set a strong edge. He's got good strength for his size. He's got good length. He's like, I would say still like a good run defender despite those missed tackle rates, as evidenced by his stop rate. In terms of what scouts had to say about him, a lot of it had to do with like, hey, where was this athleticism like when you were like on the field for Penn State? And he also had kind of like lulls and like ups and downs during his time, like some games where he was like super productive, other games where he kind of like wasn't exactly like making an impact on every play. But in terms of what the scouts had to say, Dane Brugler had him as his edge 13 and 60th overall player, so he had him quite high. Quote, a 2-year starter at Penn State, Dennis-Sutton was an outside edge rusher, 3-point stance, in former defensive coordinator Jim Knowles' scheme. He posted nearly identical production each of the past 2 seasons and led the Big Ten in pressures per game in 2025. He also added special teams duties as a senior and accounted for 3 block punts. Dennis-Sutton wins with a combination of quickness and power in all facets of his game. He isn't very deceptive as a pass rusher, but his hands are active and aggressive, which allows him to mix up his attack with varying swims, stabs, rips, and chops. Though he offers a solid anchor in the run game and rarely gives in, he lacks explosive twitch getting off blocks or redirecting in chase mode. Dennis-Sutton will find sack production harder to come by against NFL blocking, but he is a commanding presence and has the size, strength, and quickness to be a force player on the edge. He will be more appealing to teams looking for a high floor role player as opposed to a high ceiling pass rusher. And so that's kind of where, end quote there. And so that's kind of where like, it's like, it does seem like the general consensus is like, his ceiling is not as high as his athleticism testing might have you believe, is what scouts tend to believe. That's kind of like the takeaway of like, they don't think he plays up to that testing. And then Zierlein from NFL.com also said, quote, Dennis-Sutton is a base defensive end with toughness. He's effective against the run, but he has limited pass rushing upside. His predictable linear rush lacks the burst and bend to beat tackles to the top of the rush and flatten into the pocket. He uses hand violence and brute force to challenge tackles with weak anchors. He'll get bounced around because his pad level is too high, but he's tough to finish and finds his way to the action when it's near him. Dennis-Sutton is equipped to muddy running lanes, but might not make many impact plays. He has average upside as an odd or even front end, end quote. And so I do think it's interesting that a lot of people seem to be like, oh, like the ceiling's a little bit questionable in terms of like both Brugler and Zierlein saying that. But at the same time, you see this elite athleticism in his testing. And so it is a little bit of he's a bit of a conundrum in some ways. Wouldn't you say that? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, his testing doesn't really match up to the sort of consensus of a low ceiling player. So we'll see how that plays out. And both of them seem to think he's got kind of like, he'll be a decent depth edge rusher, seems to be the thought of the scouts.
Yeah, and I do think, like, we didn't talk about this as much in usage, but I think he wasn't asked to do it a lot, but he dropped in coverage a little bit, and I do think his like wingspan and his length and his like pretty good movement skills for his size might make him, besides Micah, maybe the best in terms of that edge rush group in terms of dropping into coverage, which the edges might be asked to do more in this 3-4 scheme. And so you wonder if maybe he might be a guy that like is asked to do that more, and that versatility might get him on the field more than like a guy like Sorrell, who is maybe more of a traditional, like fits more as a 4-3 D end. Like, I don't know. What do you think there?
Yeah. So is he the heir apparent to the Preston Smith role? Is that what you're saying?
I think so. And I think he's like,
he's got like the wingspan and the length to challenge balls, I guess.
Yeah. And he's obviously like a lot lighter than Preston Smith too. Cause like Preston Smith was like 20 pounds heavier than him. And so I think that's like a major difference there. But like, you're looking at the other edge rushers, you don't really want LVN dropping into coverage probably. Like, that's not really, I don't think that's his strength. Sorrell, I don't think that's his strength either. Colin Oliver, maybe. You know, he was a guy who's
That
played
was
some
the one I was
off-ball
going to
linebacker
suggest as
before.
well.
Yeah. But I don't think, and like, I think Micah can obviously do it, but like, I think every play you don't pass rush Micah, the other team is like, thank you very much. like, thank you for taking your best player out of the play. Yeah, exactly. So I think while he's probably the best at that, would be a bad idea to have him dropping coverage more than like once a game at most. And so I do wonder if maybe that's a path to Dennis-Sutton playing more early on, maybe.
It could be that for certain packages, and we'll see what it's going to be a very interesting battle between Sorrell, Dennis-Sutton, and
Cox and Oliver.
Cox and Oliver play across from LVN in the beginning.
Yeah, because I don't think it'll be. It's got to be a bigger guy who can defend against the run, and so I would imagine it's going to be Sorrell early, but I think it's an open competition.
Yeah, probably the favorite right now is Sorrell, but we'll see how training camp plays out in the spring practices and everything. I am very excited to see one-on-ones.
Yes,
in these practices.
Me too, because I mean, if we were power ranking like the matchups we wanted to see in the trench group, I think number one to me would be. Well, I would say Morgan versus Micah, but also Micah's probably not going to be ready by then, and also Micah would probably eat Morgan's lunch. But I'll say Morgan versus LVN early, I think would be number one for me. I think number two might be like Morgan versus Dennis-Sutton.
You know, another one I'd be interested in is like Ryan versus Wyatt and Hargrave.
Yes. Belton versus Wyatt and Hargrave.
And Belton.
I want to see how Belton looks going into this next year, like with real actual time to prepare at right guard, because he did not really have that. But like I do think we should have 2 episodes. I've been thinking recently as I'm kind of planning out what we're going to talk about with so many fewer deep dives to talk about. I was thinking like, if we did like a draft of like matchups we're most excited to see in training camp, or a draft of like biggest question marks going into the season, or like question marks that if they worked out well, like have the biggest impact for like the Packers in 2026. I think my number one overall pick would be the offensive line. Number 2 might be Jonathan Gannon. With that, I'm still really curious to see what happens with Gannon, and as we're talking, kind of circling back to Dennis-Sutton here, how he uses the edge rushers in terms of how much they're getting dropped into coverage, how much like twists and stunts are they doing, like what are they asked to do in this defense? Are we blitzing guys like is Micah going to be able to line up over the center like he was last year? Is that something that Gannon's going to do? I have so many questions about what this defense is going to look like. And just to kind of bring it back to Dennis-Sutton, how guys like him are used. Is he asked to drop more into coverage than he was in college? Because he wasn't asked to do it a lot in college, but he looked pretty decent doing it. How does that work with having a guy like LVN out there who's probably never done that more than a handful of times in his life? I think when we talk about these defensive players coming in, like a McClellan, like a Cisse, like a Dennis-Sutton, I feel like part of one of the most difficult parts of projecting them is we really don't know what this defense is going to look like. I actually spent all of yesterday going back and watching the Packers-Cardinals game from last year, and I came away with it like, oh man, I wish the Cardinals were doing more interesting stuff. I mean, they are like they are doing interesting stuff. They're doing 3 safety stuff, but like it did feel like early on in the game they really held us down, and then once we figured out like after halftime, once we figured out what they were doing, it felt like kind of easy to get through it. But you could argue, hey, maybe that's just a lack of talent on the Cardinals side. Like they didn't have a lot of like premium players, and maybe with more premium players, Gannon can get a better defense out of it. But I digress. We were talking about Dennis-Sutton. Anything else from the production or the scout stuff that you wanted to like touch on really quick?
No, not really. You had a few more.
Yeah, I had a few more because we also have like the Packers thoughts on him. So if we'll talk about what Gutekunst had to say about him. This is per Packers Wire that does a really good job of collecting all of the quotes. But Goody was obviously very high on him. We talked about how Gutekunst said like, hey, after we like picked McClellan, we were trying to trade up for him, and they were like happy that he fell to them. But this is the quote on how he sees him as a player. Quote, "First of all, his production is really, really good. his size, his speed. He's got so much in front of him as far as his best football goes. He's an elite athlete guy for a guy who was almost 6'6", who played around 265. His ability to come off the edge and rush the passer, affect the passer. He can bull rush. He can win with speed. His length affects the passer. He can set edges. He's got a lot to offer and a lot of good football in front of him, end quote. And then John Wojciechowski, who is the director of player personnel for the Packers, said, quote, "He is a pass rusher who's got size. He can chase down the quarterback and chase down running backs, traits that had production in college. He is still green. We're very excited." So I do think it does seem like both Gutekunst and Wojciechowski kind of view Dennis-Sutton in a different way than Brugler and Zierlein, who both felt like maybe his upside was capped. Gutekunst and Wojciechowski, on the other hand, seem to think that he's a very raw player who is a high developmental upside guy. So I thought it was a little bit interesting to see the contrast there between the two views of the player. And it does seem like it's interesting because if you look at the production stuff and his ability to just kind of win with strength, not a lot of like super flashy, hyper athletic movement, that kind of indicates to me, like the production profile stuff, a higher floor. And then you look at the elite athletic testing stuff, that kind of indicates a higher ceiling. So I do think he is a little bit of an enigma as a player in that way. But did you find it interesting at all also that like the, Brugler and Zierlein's like thoughts on the player don't necessarily line up with Gutekunst and Wojciechowski's?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. And maybe the difference is whether you see a vision for that athleticism to come out on the field in the future, and whether you can coach that out of him so that he can tap into it more than just going on what you saw in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just like, how much do you think like that athleticism is just not being tapped into on the field? Or if it's just like, some guys are just like, it's the opposite of being like the just football guys. Some guys for their athleticism are just testing guys, and it never really translates to the field. But so I guess maybe it depends a little bit on how you see him in that way. Any final thoughts on Dennis-Sutton as we kind of wrap up this deep dive in terms of like, conclusions, overall feelings after looking into him more? How'd you feel about the player overall?
I feel really good about the player. I'm feeling good about the depth of our edge room now. We lost 2 edge rushers, but I still feel like our edge room could be better than last year.
Yeah, I mean, I feel
overall
really good about. Yeah, I feel really good about 2 to 5. Micah coming back healthy, like slots all those guys into their ideal roles, and so that's going to be like a major component. Is when is Micah back? What does he look like? How much is he playing early on? Because I think if LVN is your 1, like how we expect it to be early in the season, that's less than ideal. I don't think he's a 1. And then, forcing every other guy up a level is maybe like not exactly perfect. And I do think it's interesting that we're already getting, the reports that Micah is expected to miss like the first 4 weeks of the season. That's not ideal, I don't think, because usually it's like, oh, you get the super optimistic report, and then as time goes on, the timeline gets pushed back. Like usually it's like, oh, they're aiming for week 1, and then they end up missing the first 4 weeks. I'm like a little nervous that it's already like that he's going to be missing the first 4 weeks, and then maybe it ends up being even longer than that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. What did you think when those reports were coming out?
I feel like that it hasn't changed, actually. That it's the same as it's always been.
Fair.
Even like to what Micah said immediately afterwards, or after the season, I should say. And so,
true.
If it's not changing, I don't think it's worrisome.
That's fair. If it's staying the same, which is what he said, post season, like immediately after the season ended. So that's fair. I think ultimately, as we wrap up Dennis-Sutton here, he's going to have a big role early on, or I think the team would like him to have a big role early on, because it's going to be early in the season, most likely, we think. LVN on one side, and then, you've got 2 major, like, snap-heavy guys from last year who are not there anymore. And so it's going to be on second-year Sorrell, second-year Oliver, Brenton Cox, who's been a rotational guy, and then Dennis-Sutton as a rookie to really come in and fill up a lot of snaps both against the run and as pass rushers early on from a team that was like really bereft of pass rush outside of Micah, especially to end the year last year after Wyatt went down. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot on his plate. I think he is capable of flashing, but I do think he's going to have to, he's going to have to, I think, show out in training camp for the defense to feel like really comfortable with where it is in that edge room early in the season with LVN as the one and then rotating these secondary guys. I almost think he's going to need to contribute early on for this defense to like make an impact on like against, teams. Like we said, the start of the schedule is not crazy strong, but still games you have to win.
Yeah, I think one thing that to keep in mind is some players can play pretty well on a limited role, but if you boost up their snaps too high, their efficiency starts to drop.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say you either need guys to be able to maintain play with a bigger role or to spread that role around on a number of different players.
Yeah, and just as a final thought there, it's a good thing to point out that, some players don't play as well or like their efficiency doesn't scale as you up their workload. And so I do think it is like a point for Dennis-Sutton that he had a really big workload at Penn State and his efficiency numbers were still really good. And so maybe if he has a smaller role in the NFL, like he's just stupid efficient, like it's like a crazy impactful pass rusher on a small number of snaps. But time will tell. We will definitely be looking at this edge room in training camp as I think maybe the second most important room. Like I think you could argue offensive line 1 and then edge room number 2. I think like they'd be neck and neck for me. So I think that's going to be a really important one to watch in training camp. And we will be keeping an eye on it during training camp. We will be doing an episode every single week for the entire off season. So don't turn that dial. We still got to finish our deep dive series as well. So we'll be talking about the rest of the draft picks, Jagger Burton, Damani Jackson, and Trace Mack going forward for the next 3 episodes. So check those out. We already talked about Cisse and McClellan, so check those out as well. Thank you again for listening. Like I said, an episode a week for the rest of the season or rest of the off season rather. And then once the season starts, 2 a week. Once again, follow us on YouTube, like Spotify, Apple, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like, leave a review, tell a friend, tell a stranger, tell everyone. Follow us on Blue Sky at Father Son Packer for updates on Packers related news and new episodes. Thank you again for listening though. This has been our deep dive. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.